Alright. I'll note that I'm recording this video just off a win with a Skippy Eye. Very hard difficulty, normal battle mastery, but a victory all the same. And it was basically my third win of the Roman faction in the game, of Total War Roman Mastered. And I figured to myself, this is a good time basically to jump into doing some tier list for this game perhaps. Now, I want to note that this is the tier list I basically have right here. But something basically to know about this tier list is that it's actually based off another tier list. This one right here. And this tier list is basically made by Quality Old Games. He actually already did a video with this tier list, and basically just how I basically sort of found out and got the idea basically to do it myself. You'll note that basically these tier lists here are basically very much the same. Except for a couple differences with lettering basically here mine, as opposed to his, which didn't have it. And the whole idea basically for this mercenary tier list is sort of basically throughout what I basically consider be the best mercenary units for the worst, etc, etc. Alright, so I'll note that I put a lot of thought basically into doing this as well. I actually went through a Google sheet basically here, sort of giving some ideas to myself how I basically rank basically all these mercenaries in the various categories that are going to be used. For example, how good are they as garrisons? What are the combat abilities like? How available are they basically in the gameplay? What's the regional use like? Are they sort of tactics filler? Are they fun? And for most part, I think I did a fairly good job basically in more or less decide what the values basically for them are going to be. So let's just get to it. So I'll note that basically in this tier list here, I have cavalry basically first, then I have some missile cavalry, then we have elephants, then we go into infantry, archers, and skirmishers. So the first thing I had on the list was the Bedouin cavalry, and as you can basically see here, I didn't rank this very highly. I actually ranked this to be on par of the Samnite mercenaries, which is not exactly the worst. The worst I think are the Arab cavalry, but they have some issues. And the reason I basically consider the Bedouin cavalry basically sort of terrible is just where they basically are in the map, and what they're basically sort of up against. For most part, the Bedouin cavalry are a cavalry unit, and cavalry units in this game are not that great. They're basically sort of slower than horses, and even though they have a common bonus against horses, you're probably not really going to be using them against other horses for most part in the Middle East, because there's all those chariots basically to deal with. There's cataphracts, which are basically still armor legions of death. So they aren't that great basically for where they basically are. And against the infantry, you can use them against Eastern infantry easily enough, but they're really just not that great. You could take them basically out of the desert as well, but I mean, why are dragging out the person who's that far away from their areas? So I didn't really consider them to be that great, so they're down terrible. Next to them is basically the Arab cavalry, and for some reason, the Bedouin cavalry here, they're just not that great. I actually consider them to be a little bit worse than the Bedouin cavalry, because at least the Bedouin cavalry have the ability of being a tactics filler unit, so to speak. Basically with Bedouin cavalry, you can make sort of you use them against enemy horsemen and stuff like that. The Arab cavalry don't really have that sort of purpose, I guess. And I just give this a 2 perhaps, just to sort of make them on par with the Bedouin cavalry. But the thing about the Arab cavalry is that their only real use is gonna be to chase down enemy infantry or other fleeing characters like that. Basically, you're not going to stand up to the other cavalry units that are basically in play. If there's any chariots around, it's going to fold immediately. So they have issues to the Arab cavalry, and where they're basically at in the campaign, they're just not that great to basically recruit. Now, in contrast to these Middle Eastern cavalry units, the barbarian mercenary cavalry is a whole different beast, so to speak, in ways of measuring it. Now this guy basically I give a B class, and as you can see, I give his stats a lot more these other guys. Part of the reason that the barbarian cavalry mercenaries are so top tier as opposed to say the Arab cavalry, is just because they're very good about charging stuff, and where they're basically situated on the map against barbarians and stuff like that. they're very ideal for like, being used. Now, the thing about the Barbarian like Cavalry unit is that it's very like cheap to basically recruit. It's pretty plentiful, and you can basically use it to like chase down a lot of like infantry units or like Roman like units as well if you want. And it'll do like pretty effectively like the task like clearing away like enemy cavalry, which are like the thing about like the enemy cavalry units basically like where they're basically situated. They're like not really like that much like better off than like the cavalry like units mercenaries right here. So they can actually put up like a fairly decent fight and like do quite a bit of damage. And you can actually use them for like hammer and anvil taxes like quite easily, because there's not like a lot of like enemy cavalry units except for like the British terrorists you have to worry about. So they're pretty like top tier for what you can basically use them for. Alright, Sarmatian mercenaries. These guys I consider to be like sort of on par with the barbarian cavalry mercenaries, but they have like a little bit of like better combat abilities and they're like a better tactics in like some regards. Their main down points though is the fact they have like very low availability, and you're not going to use these as like a garrison unit. By the way, it's like something you actually do with like these guys for them. You can actually use them as garrisons, but these are like strictly for like being used in like the campaign. And for the most part, the thing about the like the Sarmatians, their main like draw is the fact that they have a very high charge, and you can actually use them like a lot more effectively than like these guys for like charging into stuff. But they're like their main like penalties basically is like they're very hard to recruit because you have to go all the way over to like Scythian lands, basically over like the the Far East, I guess we'll call it, and you basically have to like go all around like Scythian lands to get like a lot of like these guys basically recruited. You can like sit at the edges of it and like sort of recruit them, but it's just not that great because it takes forever to sort of like build up an army of them. And for most part, armies basically, except for like the Greeks, they're probably gonna have like some like equivalent basically to this. They're basically equivalent to like the Scythian like noble like cavalry, I guess, in like the like the what do you call them? There's basically barbarian armies and there's like horde type of armies. That's what these guys really are. They're basically like noble horde like sort of warriors, so to speak, equivalents. And most like other like factions will have some equivalent basically to this. Eventually Rome will as well, for example. They're very good like early on for like the pre-Marian like reform units, but they have like issues like yes they're like very powerful, but they take forever to like sort of recruit. So there's like sort of like issue with them. Now Numidian like mercenaries. I really had to think like how like to best describe these guys. They're basically very similar to like these like are two like units right here, but they basically throw like javelins at basically their enemies, and after the javelins are used up, you can basically sort of use them for like cleaning up like fleeing enemies and like doing like very weak like handle anvil tactics. I've had like good like success with these guys sometimes. One of the best uses I find for them is basically like bundle them up into like a small little group, and so like pick out like enemy cavalry they basically want to like sort of kill. For example, if you're like a Roman general, for example, I was using them against like the Julii like in like the Civil War, and I basically like threw these guys around and back to sort of like pick them off and like draw them away and like just like enough of them that they could just like kill like the general before like the armor could basically react to it. And then of course I sent my army basically into sort of like sweep away like everything that's there, so nothing basically to it. So I've had like some decent success with these guys, and early on, for example, in like the the very start of the game, these guys are like just a godsend to sort of destroy like stuff around you. So I like them. They're pretty decent for like what's basically on offer. So I don't consider them as strong as these two units right here, but they're decent enough. All right, the Bedouin archers. Now these guys are considered to be a little bit better than like the Bedouin cavalry, but not by a whole lot. The main thing like these guys basically have like compared to these guys is the fact that they have like the bows and they can't fire on horseback, which basically means like they're like very powerful in like a combat like situation. They're basically gonna be able to like kite like infantry, which is basically gonna make them like capable of like this like devastating for the most part. But they're gonna have like issues against the enemy cavalry, which is like their like main like issue. They're not really strong enough to basically face off against like enemy cavalry because like they're basically like, not like melee like based like mercenaries like these guys. They have like the camels basically like to scare enemy horses, but against like a well-trained calf fracker and stuff like that, just again they're just gonna fold, and they're just not that great basically overall for like dealing with like enemy cavalry. They're okay if like a faster like infantry unit that can like sort of like skirmish a little bit, but they're just not like the best thing to sort of like, play with, unfortunately. These guys here though, the like Scythians archers, horseback archers. These guys, however, are awesome. Now, this is like one of the few units basically up here that basically got like the score of 21. And the thing about these guys is they have like awesome combat abilities where they can like, race ahead like all like our cavalry units and like sort of like pepper with like arrows. They're very available. You'll find like compared to like the Sarmatians, they're like very like easy to sort of like recruit like at the edge of their lands, and even like inner lands are still pretty available as well. So they're not that bad to like pick up a nice like sizable like force basically with. They're pretty useful in their own region because you can basically use them against like anything that like is nearby for like devastating effect. Not really useful against like Scythians themselves, but I mean they're still pretty effective. As a tactics filler, they're basically useful in like all our armies and stuff for like the Scythians themselves. I don't really find them a whole lot of fun. By the way, I don't like sort of like playing with like archers on horseback that much, but I will notice that they're still like a pretty damn powerful unit. So yeah, Scythian mercenaries. There's like our first S class like tier unit right there. Now, Mercenary War Elephants. This might be a shock to some people, but I actually don't consider these guys to be like one of the better units in this game. They are still like I shouldn't say it like that. They're basically not the best unit in the game. They're still like an excellent unit to basically play with overall, but they have some deficiencies that still like drawn back a little bit. Note, for example, you don't want to keep these guys in garrison like the Sarmatians because like they're very expensive units to sort of keep around, and you want to basically always have them on the attack anyways. And the other major issue that we have is availability. I'm not that basically playing with the Scipii recently. I was able to recruit like a Mercenary War Elephant, but I wasn't able to actually like use them before I actually won the game. So I basically like last I think like 110 turns into the game, and that's basically around the time I was able to recruit a Mercenary War Elephant. So they're not very available, and that's like a bit of like an issue basically playing with them. They are fun to play with, for example, and like I play with them in like custom battles, and it just devastates like stuff, the Mercenary War Elephants, but or I didn't actually play like in like the female like elephant sector is fun overall. So even not like using it basically in like the main game. I know they're basically really fun. Like I play with like Carthaginian elephants and stuff like that. So yeah, they're fun units, but they're not the best unit. They got some issues with like availability and like you can't use them in garrisons, and they're like these guys here, but they have issues in these like two categories like majorly. Alright, well, that's basically it for like the cavalry, sort of like, melee type of units, I guess we'll say, and like, archers and stuff like that. Let's go into infantry. So, the first thing on this roster is going to be the Barbarian Mercenary Unit. And these guys are actually not that bad for what they basically, like, have on offer. They're not as good as, like the Scythian, like, horse archers, but, they're still, like, a top tier unit for sure. The feel with these guys that they're actually very decent for, like, garrisons, because they have, like, very large unit sizes, which basically means they're good for, like, maintaining public order. And if you always want to have something that's actually able to defend itself, like say, like peasants can't defend themselves, these guys are okay for doing that. They are a little expensive, by the way. Like you find I see of the Eastern mercenaries as like a tier 5 because they're a lot less expensive and have like, the same like amount of units, but they're still overall like decent. Combat wise, I won't say they're like very special though. They can like hold their own for like a little bit, like be useful for like handling animal tactics and like doing stuff like that, but they're going to basically full pretty damn fast, unfortunately, in most cases. But they are very much of like a very available unit. You'll find basically all over Western Europe and in some like areas basically outside of that. And the thing about Barbarian Mercenaries is that like if you basically lose like a unit or two, you basically like throw another basically right in to sort of like fill that void, so to speak. So you basically use like sort of like droves of these guys to sort of like win battles for you if you want to, which makes them very like useful in their own region for our purpose. And I'll note there's a tactics filler, by the way, for the Romans for particular, by the way, because they're a experience unit basically, they can be used to sort of like deal with chariots and horse archers like the British and like other like stuff that basically running around. So war crying units, they're fun, and everything else, they're decent like unit to basically use overall. I'm happy with them. Now, the Samnite mercenaries, these guys. So, I consider Samnites to be like one of the worst units basically in this game. And they're probably basically worse than these guys right here. And the reason these guys are like so bad basically on this like list here is because like they're basically spear units that like are near like Italy, so they can be used, I guess, like for like fighting like horses and stuff like that. But the thing about the Samite mercenaries is that they feel like they don't really have any purpose. You can use them for like sapping like Roman like cities when you basically get like attacking like Rome, if like you're like a non-Roman faction. But the thing about them is that like they're basically like sort of there to be like sort of like an expensive unit to help you like take down Rome, I guess we'll say. And basically as like a Roman like mercenary, they're like just not that great to use. And I find like combat wise they're just weak. Available, you only find basically in Italy. Their only real regional use basically in Egypt is just be like used for like sapping walls and maybe like helping to hold like a city before it can like get some peasants basically in. But there's one of those units that like they feel like really lacking. And I feel like they've been like done a little bit dirty by the developers as well. But this is like a weak unit, so not really much to say about them. All right, the Eastern Mercenary. A lot of people basically consider it to be like one of the worst like mercenary types in the game, but I actually don't consider me like the worst, I guess we'll say. And they're a mediocre unit for sure, but I mean they're not terrible. The thing about these guys that they're actually very good about is as a garrison unit, for example. Basically, can like hire them to like sort of like reinforce a town and like keep it from like revolting if you're like having difficulties that sort of thing. You're not gonna use them for like fighting, for example, because they're just gonna like fold as soon as like something remotely even touches them. But there are like some available to be like a basic garrison unit is basically what they're basically going to be for you in most of your campaigns. Now note that they do have some use in like the region they're basically in. Basically in the region they're basically in, there isn't a whole lot of like good infantry to sort of deal with, so to speak. You'll find like the Parthians don't really have good infantry units. The Armenians don't really have good infantry units. And Pontus to some like degree doesn't have like good infantry units as well. But basically like you can use them sort of like fight against like other like mercenary like Eastern infantry, for example. So they're not entirely without their like use. And as a tactics filler, by the way, they're like an infantry unit, and there's not a whole lot basically to like draw from. So they are terrible as a thing. So I can certainly be a mediocre unit, but they're good enough for basically what they do for the most part. Alright, so Sicilian Pirates. These guys, the basic rate is like, a little bit better than like the Eastern Mercenaries. And the thing about them is they have like some fairly good combat potential, but they have some issues with them as well. On this list, by the way, these guys are horde unit, and by horde unit, I basically mean they're sort of like a peasant unit. They don't really have any formation, so to speak. They basically just sort of like just run at like the enemy sort of like lopsidedly, and like not really like very effectively, shall we say. They do have some like interesting abilities though to make up for it though. They have very powerful like combat abilities where like they have a very high attack and they basically throw javelins before they basically charge in. And in a region they're basically in, you can actually use them to sort of like if you're basically like Parthia or like the other like factions I mentioned, Pontus or Armenia, they're okay as like a fill unit to sort of like help you fight stuff, so they're not like terrible. They have like a like tactics filler where like you can basically throw on walls of like sounds to sort of like clear out enemy units or like do other stuff. Probably major like benefits is are really fun to basically play with, I think, because pirates, why not? I'll note by the way for availability. These units are actually like probably one of the least available units in the game, like just after Mercenary War Elephants. And this is basically because they're only available in like one region in the entire like map of like the world. Basically I think it's Seleucia. Not Seleucia. It's a Seleucid like capital. I can't remember the name, but basically that's basically where you basically find them. And that's like their major like negative against them. I'll note something that are basically like more available in like the War Elephants, by the way, because you basically can like recruit them a lot more like plentifully than like the War Elephants, which basically take forever to basically recruit, but they're still overall pretty terrible to recruit like available wise. So there is that. All right, Spanish mercenaries. These guys. My headset went down there for a little bit, but Spanish mercenaries. These guys are like shall we say, they're basically described as being Hasidic lights. And the thing about these, like, Spanish mercenaries is that they, like, don't really have any, like, real, like, purpose basically on the field, I guess, where they basically are. They're basically, like, far weaker than, like, the, Scuderii, which are basically, like, the, Spanish, like, infantry unit. And they're weaker than Hasidic. So, they're not really that like very useful for like all intents and purposes. You can basically like recruitments like say like the like Gaulish forces I guess to like have like some sort of like javelin throwing like unit behind your like your main forces, and it can like at least have some like damage potentially basically from melee combat, but they just want units that like also really need like an extra force. I'd rather just avoid basically getting them. The same thing can be said for the Phrasians by as well, but they have a couple like benefits that sort of like differentiate them from like the Spanish here. For example, like they're fairly decent garrison unit, as like they're a little bit cheaper than say Hastati, but at the same time they have like more like use than say a town watch. And they're fairly available, these guys, as well. Unlike the Spanish mercenaries, for example, you only find them in Spain, in the Iberian region. But Frisian mercenaries you can basically find like all over Greece and in some places of Turkey as well. So, they got that basically going for them. They're a war cry unit, but at the same time, I find they're like not that fun to play with because they basically die too easily. They don't have any armor, these guys, so they just like keel over a lot of the time. But if you need like a mercenary unit to sort of like guard your cities, I guess you can use for that. But not a whole lot more than that, I guess. So, and by the way, this is where like the these like letters come into play, where like these are Thracian, these are like Bastarnae. So, yeah, we'll throw those guys right there. All right, so there's a Bastarnae right there, by the way. These guys basically ranked as like a B class like sort of unit. Now, I'm not the Bastarnae. I have like mixed feelings basically about these guys because they're basically glass cannons, but they have like an extra hit point. And they're basically a lot more like dangerous than like the Thracian mercenaries, so they can actually like at least deal with like some of like the lighter units and basically like throw them like up against like you can basically throw them against like militia hoplites from the back or like other stuff. Well, if you can throw them against any hoplite in the back, they're gonna basically just like rot them for sure. But they can basically be thrown against Hastati and like other like light like infantry like that, and like more or less come out on top very easily. So they're okay for that. The main problem for them is that they're already like lacking ways they get. I have these guys basically. Oh, I have these guys actually as like a yellow guy. So, whoops, this is for throw these guys down here a little bit. So, throw them right there. The thing about these guys right here, basically the Starny. The thing about these guys is that like they're not really that available. They're not like the Thracians who are basically like available easily all over Greece. These guys are only available in like northern Greece for the most part. And the thing about them is that like most of like the factions basically have like some equivalent to like heavy mercenary units sort of like this. And these guys are sort of like heavy mercenaries by the way, but it's like they're like a very expensive unit that like doesn't really amount to much for the most part. Usually I think like might basically better spend elsewhere unless you need like flanking unit to like like say the Greeks or something like that, because the Greeks basically have like crap cavalry and like crap infantry, so they can at least somewhat form a line. But these guys, their only real purpose basically is sort of like you like be like a unit basically to sort of roll against like weaker units, or like maybe like as like the Greeks or like the Macedons, you might use them as like a extra infantry units to like take walls and stuff like that. But they're like a very like weak unit for sure. Not like the mercenary hoplites are basically gonna come after him, by the way. So let's jump into them, I guess. So unless these guys basically are like another of these like top tier like S class ones, and for me, actually, because these guys be ahead of like the Scythian like horse archers. And the reason why is because these guys are like so useful on the battlefield for like so many purposes. They're basically very excellent garrison unit to sort of like hold off like enemy attacks, because basically in the close confines of the city, you can use them defensively to sort of like hold choke points, or like to charge up like a choke point, like to sort of clear away stuff. The combat abilities are just top notch to sort of like basically knock off like infantry, just destroy cavalry and like chariots and stuff like that. So it's awesome for that. They're basically available like all over like Europe for the most part. You'll find them basically in like some parts of like Africa. You'll find them basically in like southern Italy, all over Greece, of course, all over like Turkey, and like down like the coast of like where like Jerusalem basically is, Israel, and like stuff like that. They're basically useful wherever you pick them up, because basically like a lot of factions like the barbarian factions, the Romans, they don't have like a phalanx unit. So basically you'll be able to get like a phalanx unit if you basically like pick them up. And the thing about these guys as well is that like they're not really useful against like say the Greeks or like, the Macedons, because like they also have like phalanx units, but they're still useful nonetheless. Tactics for sure. They aren't that fun to use, by the way, because they're kind of slow and it takes forever for them to get into combat. I mean, if I face say like one issue, then it's like that. That's a very minor issue for sure. All right, Balearic Slingers, and these guys are of course like it's like same like unit type of things right here, but whatever. These guys basically are like they're pretty powerful for what they're basically used for. Now think about slingers, by the way. I generally have like a very like mixed opinion basically on them. They're very fun to use when you basically get them get them like lined up in like that perfect formation where like it's like pelt like an enemy general or something like that, and it's like take them out like in a fight immediately. But the thing about these guys is that they're very expensive sort of like to buy and like find and stuff like that. They can basically have like issue like with friendly fire where you basically kill off your own units if like they're basically behind it because they can't fire like arc shots basically over them. And regionally wise, they can be useful as like an archer unit because a lot of factions like the barbarians don't really have better, and even like the Romans basically don't have better until like Mary Reform. So there's that basically going for them. But overall, a very like decent like archer unit if you basically like want like the use slingers, and I want to like scoff at basically getting them. Now, note by the way, the Rhodian Slingers are basically the exact copy, basically, of the Balearic Slingers. They're separate, basically, from Rhodes, and, like, they're basically found in Greece. But I know they have a couple of issues with their availability because you're basically not going to find them as, like, plentifully as, like, the Balearic Slingers. Basically, over, like, Northern Africa, they're in Sicily, they're in Balearic Isles, in Spain. You only find, like, the Rhodian Slingers basically in, like, Greece and, like, Rhodes and, like, I think a little bit of, like, Turkey as well, but not really that plentiful. Regionally wise as well, by the way, you'll be competing with like Greek archers at this point. You're also competing against like other like archer units as well, like the Pharaohs like Bogart basically around to them. The thing about like the Ronin Slingers is that like they are very powerful, but I find like compared to like the barbarian factions who basically don't have like archer unit, these guys aren't as like useful basically for our purpose. So yeah, basically knocked them down basically like to 2 for regional use because compared to the Balearic Slingers, there's a little bit worse than them. They're not horrible or anything like that, but I mean, you can do a lot better, I think, with like these guys. So let's just throw them right there, I think, and like laudable. They're decent unit, but not as good as like the Balearic Slingers, basically where they are. Why put B and P there? I wonder. Well, whatever. These are Balearic, these are Rhodian Slingers, whatever. Alright, so Cretan Archers. Now, these are one of the reasons, by the way, the Rhodian Slingers basically are like, not that great regionally wise, is because they have to compete against these guys who are basically like in the same area, plus. So, Cretan Archers. They have to go into like, fantastic right there, I think. These guys basically like, are very expensive, like, elite archer unit that are basically available in like, the Greek areas. And their combat abilities are just like, stellar. They basically have like, well, how can I put this? They're the best archer unit in the game. Let's just put it like that. Basically you can just decimate like, like anything that's basically like, nearby and like in the early stages of the game of them. And you can basically easily get them to like, say like the like, Brutii or like, of course they're like the Greek factions. And even like late game, they're still going to be pretty powerful and like, as a light like, sort of artillery unit, that basically barrages enemies with like, their attacks. They're devastating against like flanks as long as you don't attack them from the front. They feel like a lot of tactics and armies. They're fun to use. Yeah, I like the Cretan Archers for sure. Libyan Mercenaries, the cheapest mercenaries in the game. Now these guys, I had like sort of like a mixed idea basically of like where to basically rank them, and I think we're gonna rank them basically like just like ahead of like the Eastern Mercenaries right here. The feel about like the Libyan Mercenaries is that they're actually fairly decent like mercenary for like guarding your like cities because they're like so plentiful basically to pick up and like so cheap basically to throw in there. They don't have like the same unit size as like the Eastern Mercenaries or like the barbarian like mercenaries, but the thing about this is that like they're basically like as cheap as peasants basically sort of like holding your cities, so I consider them like more powerful than say like a town watch for example. And I've actually like held like towns with these guys for example when I've been attacked as well. So I'm not gonna scoff them at for sure for that reason. They're basically available all over like Africa, so you shouldn't have like any trouble basically finding them. Region wise, like I think their main purpose basically is to be like a sort of like an anti like elephant unit, but you can use them for like his holding cities, like as like, just a horde like sort of like unit you can basically throw off against like, a small army basically like to fight against. Now, these guys don't really fill any tactics in your army, like, they're weaker than Velites or like, any other pelts in like other like, factions, but overall, they're still like a decent unit to basically like, um, talk about, I guess we'll say. And next is going to be Mercenary Peltists, I guess, so let's get to them. Alright, so, Mercenary Peltists. I consider these guys to be like, a D-tier unit, so let's talk about them. I think we'll say they're like a little bit better than like, these guys right here. But they're not like better than the Bellman Archers, so we'll say about that. Alright, so, these guys right here. Basically, the thing about Mercenary Peltists is that they're a very common unit. We can basically like, find all over like the Mediterranean. I think they're a little bit more like, common in the Mercenary Hoplites, but I could be wrong about that. The thing about these guys right here, what makes these guys sort of like kind of weak is the fact that like, they're sort of like, weaker than like, heavy peltists, and a little bit better than like, other factions peltists, but they're skirmishers. And skirmishers by like, design are kind of weak to this game. Unless we talk about the next one on the list, but we'll get to them in a moment. I found like Mercenary Peltists, they're only really used for me is basically used as like, it's like a sort of like, something, a body basically soften my line to sort of like, make my army bigger. You can like use them a little bit for like range, like, limited like, archery to sort of like, pelt against like, say like, hoplites and stuff like that. They're a little bit slow, but I never really found these guys to be like that, like, effective basically in game for like, much, use in like, just like, extra like, amount of biases to throw into like, in the battle. So not much basically more to basically say about them, I guess. Alright, the Illyrian Mercenaries. Now, I have to say, other like the Mercenaries basically in this game, this has to be my favorite unit basically to throw out there. And I actually consider them to be like more of a favorite than even the Elephants here, so I'm just gonna throw them right there, I think. The thing about Illyrian Mercenaries is that they're basically like sort of like a skirmish unit, but like, can actually fight. And I've actually used these guys to sort of like, fight against like, well, how can I put this? I sent these guys basically on the walls. I sent them basically like, and then flanks like enemies and stuff like that. They're very like effective in sort of like, kind of wave like, weaker troops basically, shall we say, like, Hastadians like that, sort of level like troops. And they're actually fairly available to pick up as well. They're useful, of course, against like, they're useful against like, flanks formations. And like, both from like, throwing their like, javelins basically into them in front, or like running them to the back. And they feel like a tactics filler for sure. And they're good against like, as a garrison unit because they're fairly cheap to basically like, maintain. And they, can just throw their stuff basically down like, from the walls where like, they can't be charged. So overall, I consider these like, a fairly fun unit basically to play with. And I very much enjoyed like, my like Buddha campaign where I basically like, use these guys quite effectively to sort of like, route like, armies with like, fairly decent troops basically in them. Alright, so there's my ranking basically for like, the like mercenaries basically in the game. Now, sort of like for out there, I guess we'll like, maybe compare this to like, the art tier lists basically that are like, done by like, old quality games here. We're actually like, let's just go the normal view basically here because I basically have it right, so we can go basically go to the community ranks. And I'll note this is basically what like, was basically like, from some of the other guys who basically like done their own like, tier lists with like this like list like old quality games basically did. You'll see that a lot of people always have like, stuff like mercenaries, like, our stuff basically like, top rank up here. This is actually like, amalgamation of all the stuff here, by the way. So yeah, you can see like for a lot of these lists, basically a lot of people like put like the Elephants pretty like top tier. Summations are top tier, and a couple of instances here. B for this guy over here. But anyhow, this is my list right here. Hope you guys basically enjoy like, seeing like the tier list and like, got some ideas basically like, what you might consider be like the best units. I'll note basically for like a lot of people, by the way, they might consider like, some of the stuff I was saying like, a hogwash. For example, I have like Cavalry units basically down here in terrible. A lot of people say like Cavalry is basically one of the best units basically to play with in this game, and I don't agree. I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, like, they're not like the best like, Cavalry units. They're basically able to recruit your own basically for most part quite easily. So, yeah, for most part, like, I think they deserve to be down there myself. some people probably won't. Also notice well, by the way, like, some people probably disagree, like, some missions be all the way down here, like Elephants not being like, fantastic, but whatever. Alright, well, that's basically it for this one. I hope you guys basically enjoy, like, my ranking basically for it. And take care.